The moon rose like a slow-bleeding lantern, its pale light spilling across the prairie in long, trembling bands. The land looked hollowed out, as if some ancient hand had scraped it clean of sound. Even the coyotes, usually bold in their nocturnal ceremony, held their tongues. Rhett stood outside the barn, one hand resting on the wood as though listening for a pulse beneath it. The boards were old, sun-bleached, and scarred by seasons that had come hard and left harder. Yet tonight they seemed steadier than he did. His breath drifted out in thin silver ribbons, dissolving before reaching the open fields. Inside, she slept, Aya. The Apache huntress he had dragged from the edge of death and now could not seem to free from his thoughts. Her presence had altered the air of that humble ranch the way a storm alters the tension in a valley. Nothing felt settled anymore. Rhett's thoughts wandered where he didn't want them. To the way she had studied him, silent, assessing, not with distrust alone but with the quiet ache of someone measuring the weight of another soul. He recalled the faint tremor in her voice when she whispered her brother's name earlier, a man lost in a war she had not chosen. The land shifted under a sudden wind, kicking a stray tumbleweed across the dirt. It rolled with the stubbornness of a creature that had learned long ago never to bow to the whims of fate. Rhett muttered under his breath. Storms brewin', one way or another. He stepped back inside. The warmth hit him first, the soft glow of the lantern, the faint smoke of the fire, the scent of sage she had kept in a small leather pouch. Aya stirred, not fully awake, but aware enough to lift her head slightly. Her voice was low, roughened by exhaustion. You are not sleeping. Rhett removed his hat, not as a courtesy but because he felt suddenly unworthy of wearing it before her. Hard to sleep, he said. Skies too loud. She studied him with a gaze that felt older than the very hills surrounding them. The sky speaks only when men ignore what is beneath their feet. Her meaning cut deeper than her tone. He felt it like a blade pressed gently but knowingly against the ribs. Aya's fingers brushed the blanket near her knee, not nervously, but with that uncanny sense of awareness many warriors possessed, the sense that nothing should be taken for granted. My brother used to say the land remembers everything, even the footsteps of those who run from themselves. She let the words linger. She did not look directly at Rhett then, but she did not need to. The weight of what she implied settled between them like a stone dropped into quiet waters. Rhett lowered himself onto a wooden stool, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Your brother sounds like he saw through a lot of men. She nodded slowly. He did. And he warned me once, that the most dangerous path is the one between kindness and guilt. His jaw tightened. A man could ignore many things in life, hunger, weather, loneliness, but not a truth spoken with that kind of stillness. Outside, a distant rumble echoed across the plain, hooves, too many to count. But they were far, far away, little more than a whisper behind the hills. Aya heard it too. Her head tilted, her breath steadied, her eyes sharpened. Tomorrow, she said, the land will not be this quiet. Rhett's breath froze halfway in his chest. You expect company? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the barn doors, toward the endless dark that lay beyond them, as though she could see the distant riders through the horizon itself. My people will come, she said softly. But whether they come with open hands, or drawn blades, that depends on what they find here. Rhett swallowed, feeling the noose of fate tightening around him. And what do you think they'll see? Aya turned her face fully toward him at last. A man who does not yet understand the size of the fire he stepped into. The prairie wind rose once more, carrying with it the scent of dust, imminent change, and the quiet promise of dawn. The dawn rose slowly, as if unsure whether this quiet canyon deserved the gift of light. Pale gold seeped across the rim of the cliffs, touching the stone dwellings and the sleeping embers of last night's fires. The rancher stood alone in that half-light, his breath rising in faint clouds. His body ached, yet the ache felt honest, something he had earned rather than survived. He moved without being asked. The village was still rousing itself, shadows stretching into motion, whispers drifting like threads of smoke. He gathered fallen branches, splitting them with deliberate rhythm, each swing of the axe steady and unhurried. Wood chips scattered around his boots, catching the morning light like fleeting sparks. He carried water next, hauling clay pots from the narrow river bend. The work was quiet, humbling. Each step along the worn footpath reminded him of the many mornings he once performed these same chores for a family now lost to fire. He did not speak of them today. The memory felt less like a wound and more like a compass. Across the village, several of the women paused in their tasks to observe. Their faces held neither disdain nor warmth, only watchful curiosity. To them, labor was not something one performed for praise, it was the proof of a person's fit within the world. The rancher understood this intuitively. He kept his gaze lowered, his pace steady, his breath quiet. By midday, he had mended 2 sections of fencing near the goat pens. His fingers bled from splinters, but he hid the sting beneath a set jaw. Sweat carved slow trails through the dust on his skin. Nearby, children watched him from behind a low wall, whispering to one another as if studying a creature neither dangerous nor familiar. When the leader approached, she did so in silence, her long shadow stretching toward him before her voice did. The rancher straightened, wiping his palms on his trousers. Her gaze drifted over the repaired beams, testing their sturdiness with a careful hand. "You work as if chaste," she said quietly. He answered without looking up. "I owe a debt." His voice carried the gravel of old grief, softened by this place of red stone and second chances. But she shook her head, slow and deliberate, as though correcting a misunderstanding that carried spiritual weight. "No. Debt is the hunger of guilt." She touched the repaired fence post once more, satisfied. "This is something else. Something chosen." Her words settled over him like a blanket warmed by sunlight. He felt them more than heard them. For a long moment, the canyon seemed to listen as well, the wind stilling, the distant birds pausing in flight, the silence deepening into something reverent. He lowered his eyes, not in shame, but in acknowledgement. "Then, let it be choice." The leader's expression shifted, barely, but enough. Her sternness softened into the faintest glimmer of trust, a trust built not on promises but on witnessing a man willing to carry weight that was not his alone. She turned away, but not before offering a final remark, "The village sees you." It was not praise. Not quite acceptance. But it was the closest thing to belonging he had felt since the night his home turned to ash. As the sun dipped toward the western cliffs, the rancher remained at work, repairing a final section of fence. His movements no longer felt like an attempt at redemption but like the natural rhythm of hands rediscovering purpose. The women let him be, their glances no longer sharp with suspicion but cool with consideration. A door had opened, not wide, but enough. When twilight settled, he stepped back, surveying the day's labor. What he saw was simple, a fence mended, a path swept, water delivered. Yet beneath those small acts pulsed something broader, deeper, a quiet pact forming between him and this wounded community. He exhaled, long and steady, as though releasing a weight he had carried since the fire that claimed his past. The canyon breathed with him. For the first time since arriving, he no longer felt like a burden. And for the first time since losing everything, he felt the faint contours of usefulness. That subtle shift, barely visible, easily missed, was the beginning of something neither he nor the women yet recognized, the seed of shared destiny. The morning rose with an odd stillness, the kind that feels borrowed from a world holding its breath. The women moved about the camp in their usual rhythm, gathering wood, tending small fires, checking the woven baskets drying on the rocks. Yet beneath every motion, there was a quiet stiffness, a sense that the land itself was unsettled. The rancher stood atop one of the stone terraces, surveying the horizon the way a man reads scripture, slow, careful, searching for hidden warnings. The desert was a vast page of pale gold and rust. But beyond that horizon, something unnatural bloomed. Smoke. A thin column at first, rising like a lifted spear. Then another. And another. He narrowed his eyes. Settler smoke did not wander. It announced. And in the west, barely visible, 5 dots moved in formation across the sun-baked flats. Riders. He descended the terrace without haste, but with a heaviness in his step the tribe had not seen since the day he arrived. The Apache leader met him at the foot of the slope, her expression carved in stone. "You see it?" she asked. "I see trouble," he replied softly. 5 riders. Maybe more behind M. The younger women clustered around, their eyes sharp, their hands twitching near their bows. None of them spoke, but the message in their glances was clear. Peace had been a thin gift, beautiful, but always borrowed. The leader turned toward the canyon's narrow throat, the only path through which an outsider could enter. The canyon walls towered like ancient guardians, but even stone could not promise safety forever. She gestured for scouts, and 2 young women sprinted toward the ridge. Their steps were quick but controlled, warriors taught to move like wind between stones. The rancher walked beside the leader in silence. He did not speak of fear, he did not need to. His jaw was set like a man seeing ghosts, because one of those shapes on the horizon was not a stranger. "I know one of the riders," he finally murmured. The leader stopped. "How?" "Tall man. Moves with a kind of arrogance. I'd know his posture anywhere. He was there when my homestead burned." The leader's eyes darkened. She did not offer sympathy, only understanding. The desert had taught her that wounds shared aloud were not cries for comfort, they were admissions of truth. "Then they come for blood," she said. "They always do," he answered. A hush fell across the camp as the scouts returned. Their report was short, their voices tight. 5 riders. Settlers. Guns. They move fast. "And they will smell a hidden place," said another. The women began preparing, not frantically, but methodically, like those who had lived too long in the shadow of danger to fear it anymore. Bows were strung. Spears examined. Children moved deeper into the canyon dwellings. Fire pits were covered to hide the shine of embers. The rancher stepped forward and addressed the leader with the calmness of a man choosing his path. "You'll need the canyon mouth watched." She studied him. "You offer this freely?" He nodded once. "They're comin' for you. But one of them is comin' for me." She placed a hand over her heart, then extended her palm toward him, a silent acceptance. Together, they walked toward the canyon's edge, where shadows pooled like waiting ink. The desert stretched before them, vast and indifferent, holding its secrets in shimmering heat. The smoke on the horizon thickened. The riders grew clearer. The peace they'd built hung by a thread thin as a horsehair. The rancher breathed deeply. He had arrived in this canyon as a dying man. But now he stood not as a captive, nor as a guest, but as someone with something worth defending. And for the first time in months, his heart beat not with grief, but with purpose. The threat was no longer coming. It was already here. The canyon mouth lay in a long, narrow hush, its rocks rising like ancient judges carved from centuries of sun and silence. The rancher stood near the entrance with the Apache leader at his side, each framed by the canyon walls that now felt less like stone and more like ribs of a living sanctuary. Hoofbeats approached in a slow, swaggering rhythm. They were not cautious. They were not afraid. The riders moved with the confidence of men who believed the land belonged only to their boots and their bullets. Dust curled around them like a warning too subtle for their kind to hear. When the first rider appeared, a tall man with a scorched duster and a familiar cruelty leaning behind his eyes, the rancher felt his breath hitch, not from fear, but from recognition. The man who had burned his homestead. The man who had turned his life into empty ash. The settler leader grinned as he spotted the rancher. "Well, I'll be," he drawled. "Didn't expect to see you walking around. Thought the coyotes would have picked you clean." The rancher stepped forward, not aggressively, but with the weary dignity of a man who had walked far beyond the reach of intimidation. "You burned my home," he said quietly. "You killed my family." The man shrugged. "We burned a lot of places. Hard to remember them all." Behind the rancher, the Apache women watched from the canyon shadows, bows lowered but ready, silent as carved obsidian. The leader stood beside him, unwavering, her presence a pillar of calm strength. The rancher's voice did not rise. "You came here for blood that isn't yours to take." "We came," the rider said, "to clean out this nest. Don't take kindly to savages hidin' in our land." The Apache leader stepped forward then, her face as still as desert stone. "This canyon is ours," she said. Her English was measured, deliberate. "Your hatred has no home here." The riders shifted uneasily. Her composure was unexpected. So was the rancher's stance beside her, shoulders squared, matching her resolve. The settler leader spat into the dust. "Move aside, cowboy. You ain't one of them." The rancher did not move. "I am now." A ripple of tension sliced the air. Hands hovered near holsters. Hooves pawed the earth. Even the wind seemed to pause. The rancher spoke again, louder this time, not in anger, but in truth sharpened by months of silence. "You ain't lawmen. You ain't saviors. You're just men who can't breathe unless someone else is kneeling." His words stripped the riders bare, peeling away their bravado. The leader sneered, but his eyes flickered, uncertain, exposed. "You talk big for a man standin' alone." "He is not alone," the Apache leader said. From the canyon depths came a soft rustle, Apache women stepping forward, not enough to attack, but enough to make their unity unmistakable. Their silhouettes formed a quiet wall behind the rancher. The riders hesitated. They had expected chaos, panic, and easy culling. Instead they found themselves facing people who would not bow, and a man who had once been one of them now standing in defiance. The rancher looked the settler leader in the eye. "You ride out," he said. "Now. And you don't return." The man's hand twitched toward his gun. For a heartbeat, the canyon world froze. Then he saw it, the precision in the Apache archers' stances, the sharpened awareness in their eyes, the strength in their unity. And the rancher, standing firm beside their leader, was not a man they could afford to shoot without consequence. The settler leader cursed under his breath, retreating with a sharp tug of his reins. "Fine," he growled. "Live with your pets." The men turned their horses, their departure a slow, reluctant surrender. Dust rose around them, then drifted away on the wind like vanishing ghosts. The canyon remained still long after the hoofbeats faded. The rancher exhaled, not in triumph, but in something deeper, release, perhaps. The Apache leader turned to him. You stood when you could have walked away. I've done enough walkin', he replied. The standoff had not been a battle of bullets. It had been a battle of truth. And truth, spoken with courage, had been enough to send murderers back into the desert. Night settled over the canyon with a softness it rarely offered, its usual sharp edges smoothed by the hush that follows danger narrowly turned away. The fires had been lit early, glowing like low constellations along the stone walls. Smoke drifted upward in thin ribbons, carrying with it the day's tension and the quiet relief now breathing through the camp. The rancher sat near the central hearth, his hands still trembling faintly, though he hid it well. He felt the weight of what had happened, how close death had ridden, how close old violence had returned to claim something new and fragile. The echo of the confrontation still circled in his thoughts, but it no longer hollowed him out. It steadied him. The Apache women gathered gradually, forming their nightly circle. They spoke in low voices, their tones calmer than they had been in days. The canyon itself seemed to exhale, as though acknowledging that fate had tilted in their favor. The tribe's leader approached the rancher, her steps measured, her expression unreadable. For a moment, he wondered whether he had overstepped, whether standing beside her earlier had been welcomed or merely tolerated. She stood before him without speaking. The silence stretched, long enough for doubt to begin stitching itself into his chest. Then she extended her hand and laid it gently on his shoulder. It was not a gesture of pity, nor gratitude, but recognition. His breath caught, the simple touch carrying the weight of acceptance deeper than any words could have conveyed. Behind her, the younger women stepped forward as well. One by one, they placed their hands briefly upon him, each touch a marker, a quiet pronouncement, "You belong." He bowed his head, overwhelmed by a feeling he had not known since before his homestead burned, since before the smoke, the storm, and the loss that cleaved his life in two. Community. Not the kind he had stumbled into by blood or marriage, but something chosen, and choosing him in return. The leader lowered herself to sit beside him. You faced your past today, she said. I faced a ghost, he answered. But it felt different this time. Because you were not alone, she replied. The rancher looked around the circle. Women who had once seen him only as a threat now saw him as something worth trusting. Children, once wary, looked at him with curiosity rather than fear. Even the canyon walls felt less foreign, as though they, too, had opened a space for him. Food was passed, roasted rabbit, corn, dried berries softened in warm water. When the bowl reached him, he accepted it not as a prisoner fed out of obligation, but as a member of the hearth. Their hearth. Laughter rose, quiet at first, brittle, the kind of laughter that must relearn its own shape after too many months of grief. But it grew, and the rancher found himself joining in, the edges of his voice unfamiliar yet healing. Later, as the fire burned low, one of the younger women began to hum. The melody was the same mournful song he had heard weeks earlier, a tune that carried the weight of generations. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it did not speak of mourning. It spoke of endurance. The leader watched him from the corner of her eye. You carry hurt, she said. But hurt can guide a man or bury him. He nodded slowly. I don't want to be buried anymore. And you will not be, she said simply. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling upward toward the canyon's narrow slice of sky. The stars appeared one by one, patient and ancient, witnesses to this fragile moment where two worlds, long divided by blood and memory, found a place to rest beside one another. The rancher looked at the circle, their faces illuminated in gold and shadow. For the first time since the ashes of his homestead cooled, he felt anchored. Not by obligation, not by fear, but by quiet, deliberate acceptance. Belonging was not something he had earned through strength. It was something he had been offered through courage, his, and theirs. And he took it. The night deepened, peaceful and whole. The rancher stayed awake long after the others slept, watching the embers pulse like a heart learning to beat again. A new life had begun inside this canyon. Not granted. Not stumbled upon. Chosen. And at last, returned. Dawn came gently to the canyon, brushing the stone walls with a faint, rose-colored glow. The light moved slowly, as though respectful of all that had transpired here, of the fear, the healing, the small victories earned through patience rather than blood. Months had passed since the riders were turned away. Months since the rancher first stepped into this hidden refuge as a dying stranger. Now he walked its paths with familiarity, his steps steady, his presence woven naturally into the daily rhythms of the tribe. He moved along the canyon floor carrying a bundle of seedlings, corn and squash the women had traded for during a cautious journey to a distant settlement. He had helped prepare the irrigation lines, carving channels through stubborn, ancient soil. The work had a rhythm, a heartbeat, and he found solace in its quiet predictability. Children's laughter rang through the air, high, bright notes bouncing between the stone walls. Once they had feared him. Now they followed him with easy trust, chasing his shadow as though it were a game. The Apache leader approached from across the field, her posture relaxed in a way he had not seen during those early days. She carried a water skin and offered it to him without ceremony. "You work too hard," she said gently. He wiped the sweat from his brow. "Work keeps the earth alive." She nodded. "And the heart." They walked the fields together, inspecting the early growth. Small green shoots pushed through the ground, fragile, determined things that refused to be undone by hardship. The rancher looked at them with quiet pride. "These'll take well," he murmured. "Yes," she replied. "The land listens when tended with respect." It struck him then, how deeply this place had changed him. He had come here as a man stripped of everything, hollowed by grief. And now, he carried not just purpose, but a sense of rootedness he had never expected to feel again. Later, as the sun dipped low, they walked the canyon perimeter. It had become a nightly ritual, a slow, meditative journey along the stones, checking for disturbances, reading the land like scripture. The leader walked slightly ahead, her silhouette outlined by the last golden light. No fear lingered in this twilight hour. Only vigilance shaped by experience, and an abiding calm earned through unity. Halfway through their patrol, she paused at a high ridge where the canyon opened briefly to the vast desert beyond. Together they looked out at the sweeping plains, red, gold, shadowed, infinite. "This land tried to kill me," the rancher whispered. "Now it saves me." She answered without turning. "The land kills no one. It tests. It waits. It sees who will listen." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then I'm learning." The stars emerged one by one overhead, bright and cold. The air shifted, cooling with the grace of something familiar returning. The rancher felt a presence settle in his chest, not just belonging, but peace. The kind that does not erase sorrow, but lets it rest without bitterness. When they returned to the camp, the fires were already burning. Women tended pots of stew, children played in the dust, elders exchanged soft, melodic conversation. The rancher stepped into the glow, and no heads turned sharply, no eyes tracked him in suspicion. He was simply part of the scene. Part of the life of this place. Part of this quiet, enduring world. He caught the leader watching him from across the fire. She nodded, small, understated, yet full of meaning. A gesture that said, "You have earned your place. You have built something with us. You are home. The rancher sat near the flames, resting his hands on his knees. The warmth seeped into him, deeper than the skin, down to the places where old wounds had long refused to heal. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a future. A future built not from what he had lost, but from what he had found. The desert, once a grave waiting to claim him, had become a cradle. A sanctuary. A new beginning carved from silence, resilience, and the improbable mercy of strangers who had become family. The rancher leaned back, looking up at the night sky, vast, eternal, watchful. The stars glimmered like tiny embers above him. Home, he thought. And the canyon agreed.